NORAD is the North American Aerospace Defense Command.
And it's located here at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
It's an alliance between the United States and Canada to secure the skies over North America.
The command center here at Cheyenne Mountain was constructed in order to provide a protected command and control facility.
What officials ultimately did is they built a fortress inside of the mountain.
It truly is an amazing feat of engineering. It is a wonder of the world.
We get up in the morning and we know we're doing something important. We are defending North America.
The defense of our homeland is one of our prime responsibilities. Personally, I don't think there is a greater service.
This is an important mission. There is no more important mission for a man or woman in uniform than to protect your home.
In a very, very topsy-turvy world, NORAD is steady. We're watching everybody.
Colorado Experience is made in partnership with History Colorado,
inspiring generations to find wonder and meaning in our past and to engage in creating a better Colorado. HistoryColorado.org.
with funding provided by the University of Denver, celebrating 150 years, the Denver Public Library, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, with additional funding and support from these fine organizations and viewers like you. Thank you.
The 1950s, when NORAD was created, were the darkest years of the Cold War between the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
When World War II ended, we competed with Russia both economically as well as militarily after the war. The Russians began to develop a nuclear weapon, as of course the US had done so.
It was a time of intense global tension between these two superpowers, backed by atomic weapons.
A competitive nature developed between our two militaries, and that created a race, if you will, that armed both sides.
American military planners realized they needed an early defense warning system to watch out for Soviet bombers.
One of the shortest routes to a Western ally was either into Europe or over the poles into the United States through Canadian airspace.
In the air defense world, Canadian geography counts for a lot. There was discussion that we ought to make the air defense as an integrated system between Canada and the United States. So it started with the Continental Air Defense Command, and from there, NORAD agreement was signed on 12 May 1958.
NORAD was formed to provide first a warning, a series of radars strung all along our northern borders, and then a fighter response capability that would, in theory, allow us to shoot down those Russian bombers before they could ever drop their weapons on our soil.
The Aerospace Defense Command headquarters was originally located at St-Amand Air Force Base in Colorado Springs.
The commander wanted to go underground to protect ourselves against an intercontinental ballistic missile.
The command center here at Cheyenne Mountain was constructed in order to provide a protected command and control facility.
What officials ultimately did is they built a fortress inside of the mountain. The granite itself serves as the ramparts, the walls that would protect the operations center from an atomic attack.
Cheyenne Mountain actually represents an underground facility as we dug a tunnel inside the mountain. The Canadian contribution for building the mountain is we provided all the explosives.
Miners had to excavate more than 1 million tons of granite, essentially scoop out the inside of the mountain.
The original construction was done 100% by the U.S. The Utah Mining Company, Parsons Brinkerhoff Construction Company, the Colorado School of Mines, and then the Corps of Engineers and some Navy shipbuilders.
Colorado miners were certainly experienced at excavating huge works inside of granite. So experienced silver miners and lead miners that were very quickly able to assemble and excavate the rock.
It provided the exact geology to be able to sustain the nuclear weapons of the time. So there was a lot of engineering that occurred.
You think about the engineering capability that the United States had in the late 50s and early 60s, And Cheyenne Mountain, it is a wonder of the world.
When you go through the tunnel and you're disappearing into this giant granite mountain, you know, it's rough-hewn walls as if, you know, they just finished it. There's a fresh feel to it. It's quite impressive. And before you know it, you're making a right-hand turn into these giant blast doors.
These automated 3-foot thick doors would close shut with an apocalyptic thud. The base would be sealed off for the extent of the emergency. The personnel inside would live there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
When we shut our blast doors, we have to provide all life support systems, but we have to do it underground. We have a small fire department, we have a small hospital, we have a small chapel.
A gymnasium, a barber shop, a cantina. It feels like a small city inside, which in fact is what it's intended to be. It had to be completely self-sustaining. Planners designed the base to operate entirely on its own, cut off from everyone else for 30 to 45 days.
We can sever ourselves from Colorado Springs utilities if we need to and run prime power to generate and keep this facility running no matter what's going on outside the mountain.
You've got backup generators, you've got huge reservoirs for potable water, for fuel.
We have actually 5 lakes inside the mountain. We planned on those from the very beginning. So 3 of those lakes are our tertiary cooling system. One is our drinking water lake, and then there is our fuel lake.
One very pleasant surprise in creating the mountain was the discovery, fairly quickly in the excavation, of an interior spring, a water source that was completely self-contained inside the mountain.
So it actually gave us an inside the blast door water source to replenish those lakes and use, both in peacetime and in wartime.
Cheyenne Mountain is an essential institution for a global power in the 20th and 21st century. The buildings are made out of naval-grade steel.
The whole concept of the building and the mountain was designed around a seismic shock that a nuclear blast would have created by the Soviet Union. A nuclear blast is nothing more than a small earthquake.
So the buildings themselves are freestanding. Extraordinarily, none of the buildings actually touch the surrounding rock. The buildings are cushioned on a bed of more than 1,300 gigantic steel springs.
Those steel buildings can ride on those springs and bounce up and down or sideways to the front and back.
The entire base is brilliantly conceived to withstand the impact of an atomic explosion.
We need a lot of work to make sure that the rocks don't move and cave in. There's a crew that all they do is to make the mountain believe it's full, because the mountain is alive.
We have over 115,000 rock bolts. What the rock bolts do is actually simulate pressure. The rock bolts actually go anywhere from 3 feet to 30 feet in. We apply pressure against the granite walls. So over 50 years, the mountain never senses that void that we've created inside it.
The aliens, well, I cannot deny or confirm whether there's an alien in the mountain.
I can neither confirm or deny whether we have aliens inside.
I've walked all through the caverns of the mountains. I've yet to find an alien. But it is the stuff of legends to some degree, and Cheyenne Mountain is a legendary facility.
We've received a lot of attention from Hollywood sci-fi movies.
The science fiction aficionados do like to think that we have secret aliens and missiles inside the mountain itself.
One of the big myths that I think is really kind of funny is the perception of Cheyenne Mountain, and you know, everybody kind of equates it to War Games, the movie when it came out. There's these huge screens and just hundreds of people in there on their computers. The actual command and control facility is kind of underwhelming in that regard. If you were looking at the litmus test being War Games, the movie, you look in there and you look up on the screens and you go, wait a second, this isn't even close to what I envisioned based on the movie.
You get some people at the front gate that really have an interest in science fiction and want to see the Stargate. Unfortunately, I called MGM Studios and they no longer have a Stargate to lend me, so we did not install one.
Cheyenne Mountain, particularly for the local community, does have the feel of myth and legend to it.
Keeping some of those myths is important. It allows for people to kind of look at the mountain with a little bit of mystery, but that also has a certain effect of making the people that work in the mountain feel pretty proud about the mission that they have.
Frankly, it makes it exciting and special to come and work at NORAD. Going into that tunnel, there's always a little mystical aspect that you're going, wow, I'm coming into Cheyenne Mountain, a big icon in North American history and mythical view of NORAD.
The idea of building an air defense command center inside a mountain was really, we wanted to make sure that the Soviet Union knew that we would be organized enough, that we would survive long enough to launch a devastating counterstrike, which would make any gains that the Soviet Union hoped to get in an atomic war negligible. They would receive as much or more damage as we would, and really there were no winners.
A strategy of mutually assured destruction was the only way to deter either side from taking a precipitous act that would result in nuclear war.
Cheyenne Mountain was not in operation in October 1962 when CIA spy planes detected the presence of atomic warheads in Cuba, only 90 miles away from the American coastline, with capabilities of reaching the entire eastern seaboard of the United States.
The long-range missile became a vehicle to carry a nuclear weapon and threaten both of our countries.
There was no way that America could adequately defend against an atomic attack from such a close point of origin.
NORAD was on alert 24/7. All our forces were on a 5-minute warning, and that lasted 4 months.
So it moved about 150 extra fighters, about 10 or 11 extra batteries of air defense artillery into Florida. It dispersed many fighters to other bases and essentially stood by. So that basic organization, in many ways, it was something of a test run for the organization, and it proved that the capability and capacity was there to defend the airspace of North America.
The Cuban Missile Crisis reinforced the need to create an atomic bunker, a command center that was secure enough to withstand any kind of a threat that the Soviets could provide.
So the main threat in the 60s was the intercontinental ballistic missile. Also, the Soviets at the time put Sputnik on orbit, the first satellite to go on orbit. So we had to build a apparatus for space surveillance.
So now we have ICBMs that are thrown into the picture that we've got to be able to detect, we've got to be able to characterize, and we have to make an assessment on whether we think that they're attacking us or whether it's just a launch for them for training or testing and those kind of things. So that was one of the evolutions that we had, was adding that missile warning or the aerospace warning piece to our repertoire.
In the space warning, we're worried about man-made objects that stay in space as well that can re-enter the atmosphere and bring harm to our citizens.
As soon as Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center opens, the Space Warning Center is a critical part of that operations center. We go into the 1970s. Things change a bit. The United States and the Soviet Union both back away from mutually assured destruction. The United States adopts a policy of flexible response. That is, you're not just going to launch upon warning, you're going to try to get an idea of what's going on before you do that. And so now NORAD just didn't have the attack warning piece, it had to do an attack assessment. And in November of 1979, while one crew was being trained in Cheyenne Mountain on a full-blown missile attack on North America, that bled over into the operational site. And for 3 minutes it ran on the operational site screens. It took NORAD another 8 minutes to fully determine there was no attack underway. The first thing is it launched Matthew Broderick's film career, because this is the incident that is fictionalized and greatly exaggerated in the 1983 movie War Games. Second thing it did is that it got both Canada and the United States to seriously relook at NORAD.
Then came the fall of the Berlin Wall. NORAD at that time, which was built to face the Soviet Union, there was a lot of questions as far as relevancy and should NORAD continue now that we don't face any threat from the USSR since the USSR dissolved.
One of the misnomers is that we are a Cold War relic. I think a lot of local citizens think that we are a Cold War Soviet threat mission. Couldn't be farther from the truth.
In 1989, the United States told its Department of Defense that it would be responsible for the aerial detection and monitoring of drugs coming into the United States. Well, Department of Defense turned around and assigned this to NORAD.
President Bush declared a war on drugs, and the only system that was in place for both Canada and the United States to have a strong air surveillance was already built in NORAD. So instead of collapsing NORAD and rebuild something to face aerial importation of drugs, NORAD continued with that mission.
It altered the mission slightly from pure air defense to one of aerospace control or aerospace sovereignty, as it was called. The idea of someone is flying near your airspace and has not filed a flight plan. You don't know who it is. Maybe you want to go have a look at it.
NORAD had the watch, but we were looking outside, threats that could come from outside. And then at the time where we were looking out 9/11 happened, so September 11, 2001, the event of a generation.
The attacks originated from airports inside the United States, and NORAD had been built on the quite logical assumption that an aerial attack would come from outside the United States.
On 9/11, thankfully, we were actually in Cheyenne Mountain in the middle of an exercise, and we got word that there was an attack on the first tower, and basically that all came through the media. So we tuned into CNN right at the time, and then after the second attack, we kind of went, uh-oh, something is definitely different and wrong here.
So in Cheyenne Mountain here, we had the Canadian General Finley, who worked with General Eberhart to ground out the aircraft and to bring the situation under control, and then put combat air patrols over various population centers to make sure that everything would stop.
So at that particular time, we started taking appropriate measures to get additional aircraft airborne to go and intercept potential other targets that were out there targeting the U.S.
One of the main things they did that day was within hours of the initial attacks, they had issued the order for Operation Noble Eagle.
Operation Noble Eagle started pretty much that same day on 9/11. It's the call sign that we use for the mission that's associated typically with the counterterrorism piece.
And this is where we have the watch 24/7 with our partners from the FAA, TSA, Navigation Canada, and Public Safety Canada to make sure that no terrorists are able to use an airplane ever again.
September 11th was the first time in the post-Cold War that America faced a significant national threat. And as a result of that, Cheyenne Mountain completely locked down. It was a time when the blast doors were sealed.
We actually shut the Cheyenne Mountain doors for about a 24-hour period and opened them up the next morning after we kind of got control and kind of understood that it looked like all the attacks were done.
What's been interesting is after 9/11, both the U.S. and Canada created a Homeland Defense Command. In our case, it's called U.S. Northern Command.
What NORTHCOM is one of 6 geographic combatant commands, which is how the United States exercises global leadership militarily on a regional basis. So we needed to include the homeland as a theater of operations so that we were better prepared, better organized to actually defend the homeland.
We've morphed not only from NORAD to NORTHCOM. I mean, they're still 2 separate and distinct headquarters and 2 separate and distinct commands, but for the most part, they're so intertwined that we're pretty much one.
That really gave a boost of energy to NORAD. And from that period, General Eberhart was asked, what else do we need to prepare for our defense? And then came the idea of a maritime warning.
We realized that we had to add a role because the maritime became a very significant threat to us, and even small boats could bring in significant threats from anywhere in the world.
By the mid-2000s, the nature of threats to United States security had changed so much that it no longer seemed to make perfect sense to keep our command headquarters inside of a mountain. And so in 2008, NORAD moved its command headquarters to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado Springs.
It required a different kind of command center. It needed to have the essence of NORAD involved in it, but it also needed room for all of our partners and for all of the other types of information that we need to pull in.
The headquarters has matured to the point where it's too big to put in the mountain for normal operations, but the mountain does allow itself to quickly configure for a contingency for a shorter period of time. So the mountain has become, if you will, the alternate for the main headquarters. That was a role that was kind of reversed in the past.
We'll deploy there when required to keep our command and control systems up to speed and accurate with how they interact with the headquarters here, but we typically do training out of there once a month.
Cheyenne Mountain remains integral to the command and control system, and there are things that we can only do in Cheyenne Mountain.
The nice thing about Cheyenne Mountain is we can actually segregate it from the real world information that we see coming in at Peterson. So we can put all sorts of scenarios into the computers at Cheyenne Mountain and allow our crews to train on contingencies that we hope will never happen, but it's the only place you can provide them that training. Today, we have a partnership that includes the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force, the Coast Guard of both nations, underpinned by our civilian law enforcement, intelligence, and border protection agencies.
Our area of responsibility is really North America, but our area of interest is global because the threats to North America can come from anywhere globally when you're talking about intercontinental ballistic missiles or cruise missiles.
The Arctic is a wonderful example of that. You have a substantial amount of navigable water in the Arctic that we've not had to deal with in the past. So there's more and more interest in using the Arctic for commercial purposes. So now NORAD begins to play a role in helping to alert for misuse of the regions in the Arctic that are most protected.
We're vulnerable in ways that we haven't been in the past, and we need to understand those, we need to protect against them, and we need to do it together, and it's much more effective to do it together.
As we look at NORAD in the future, the countries have to decide what else would it be more effective to do binationally. So one of them is cyberspace. All our systems are highly computerized and rely heavily on a computer network.
Cyberspace and cyber attacks are a great concern to the United States and Canada. We are increasingly interdependent economies, interdependent systems. More and more of those are relying on the cyber domain for efficient and effective business.
As Canada and the US look at the cyberspace and how people way outside of North America can inflict harm through the internet to some of our systems, is this something we would want to do as separate nations, bilaterally, or binationally?
That sense of really integrated teamwork has permeated these headquarters in a way that we've created a much stronger bond of warning and defense and support during disasters than we've ever had before.
NORAD has proven that doing it together is a lot more effective and efficient than doing it apart.
I can't tell you the number of times it's been suggested, well, let's do something and let's use the NORAD model. And it's kind of interesting because what does that really mean? That means integration, cooperation, and not just getting along, but actually working together, actually sharing accountability is a very powerful thing.
The fact that we have been doing NORAD and NORAD mission sets for almost 60 years now shows that our binational partnership with Canada is in lockstep with them.
It is unique, and I'm hard-pressed to describe or to identify another place where a true binational command, where I can take action in minutes to defend both Canada and the United States, and I have the trust of both governments and the support of both governments to do that. It's absolutely incredible.
It's the only command where a U.S. military officer answers to both the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada, and is given authorities by both of them to conduct operations on the behalf of each of the nations. So it's a very unique relationship, unlike any we've seen in recent history. I think the one strength of this NORAD relationship has been it has pulled together not just the governments of Canada and the United States, but the people of Canada and the United States.
So we have 149 Canadian families that make their home Colorado Springs for a 3 to 4 year assignment period.
I've talked to a number of Canadian officers who've come here who greatly enjoy coming to Colorado, who greatly enjoy coming to Colorado Springs, who greatly enjoy the Colorado lifestyle. So that has been very important, that it has solidified Canada and Colorado into a relationship.
People of Colorado, they have made this a home away from home for our Canadian officers and enlisted folks. I will tell you, it is almost a binational town in that regard, in the heart.
In addition, these are people who, in many cases, become Coloradans. Those people really begin to identify with Colorado as a place to stay after their military service or come back to when they retire.
No military community exists alone and independent of the civilian community that's around it and sustains it. And here in Colorado, specifically in Colorado Springs, but really across the state, this is the gold standard. I can't imagine it being anywhere else, and I don't think we'd want to be anywhere else.
That's the real legacy that was that initial binational agreement that was made back during those really bleak days of the Cold War. It's evolved into one of the really most vibrant relationships that two nations can have. I think that will continue for many, many decades to come.
The legacy of NORAD is going to be that there can be in the world trusted relationships where you can best define yourself together on the things that you hold dear enough to fight for.
We have done huge things for all of North America in that regard, as far as being able to protect the countries of Canada and the United States in all domains. And we've been doing this mission very, very long, and I think we do it outstandingly well.
The legacy of NORAD, from my perspective, one is the incredible history that this organization has and the services that it's been providing for both countries for so many years. And we're looking forward to evolve in time with the evolving threat.
We want to be based on the idea that we'll outpace the threat together. And we're doing very well meeting that challenge.
Our citizens expect nothing less that there's an organization that makes sure that they can enjoy their way of life, that they can sleep at night.
We do the work in the background and our citizens feel safe.
Quietly, professionally, we stand ready.
There is a secret guardian that is watching out for us.
Every day, your men and women in uniform stand the watch, protecting what you value most.
There's a handful of us that are committed to guard and defend that what's most precious to us. We have the watch.